program today. We are actually, my name is Judith Matheson, and I'm actually Judith King Matheson. I come from a Celtic, Irish, and Scottish background on my mother's and my father's side. And I'm very blessed to be honored and privileged to work and to live on very special territory in the Algonquin Anishinaabe area of Gatineau, Aylmer, Quebec, from where I'm speaking today. And I was very blessed to hear a senator actually speak today from the co-chair of human rights for the Senate of Canada. Her name was Wanda Thomas Bernard. And I wanted to share as we opened this program today on our special speakers and project leaders speaking to their passion for service, on why it's so significant in the times in which we're living, how people with passion and care and compassion are living in service to a greater cause than themselves. And what this senator was talking about was a new way of framing how we acknowledge the land in this area. And it's very pertinent to our welcoming our guest from the United States, from New Mexico, Elizabeth Christine, who is a steward of the Sacred Tibetan Earth Treasure Vase, of which I was very privileged to be part of a group that helped to go through a very significant process in the heart of Canadian democracy on the land by which I am blessed to live, along the Ottawa Algonquin River watershed. And what the senator was talking about today, I think is very important to read. She talked about, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that was never meant to be owned. We recognize that most of the land that we entrusted to Indigenous people was in some places shared by choice, but all too often taken by force. We recognize the historical colonialization and the root of what has happened that has led to the present day situation, where land acknowledgements are offered in place of land. So the sacred land that we all share on Mother Gaia Earth is very significant to this conversation today. And so from the heart of Canadian democracy, we're living in the 21st century, where from my heart to your hearts, I hope everyone listening to this, in this pouch is tobacco, and it's the traditional way of welcoming and honoring an elder to the circle to share their wisdom and knowledge. And most wisdom and knowledge will come from life experiences and events that shape and mold the soul to truly begin to live from the highest purpose of why we're all gathered today on this wonderful planet called Earth. This is a time of significant change and transformation. We're going through a lot of hard times through COVID, but in that process, we are awakening inside ourselves the goodness and the best inside of each other. So welcome to this program on Uplifting Oneness, a special project by the Wutwe Wellness Learning Center and the actual website, www.Wutwe Wellness Learning. And on this website, you will see all the taped programs of our guests that come to speak to their projects, their passion that has called them to be of service to a cause greater than themselves. So as we open today, I would like to welcome Elizabeth Christine to open us in a slight prayer to center us as we listen to her story and to honor the four directions of the earth and how blessed we all are at this time of the balance becoming the wholeness and the extreme polarities that we're seeing outlived on the planet, the power of choice to choose the path that we choose to walk at this time. So Elizabeth Christine, again, I'd like to welcome you today, and I'd like to honor you by giving us some sacred space to just calm our hearts and do a short meditation so we can center and really listen to our hearts, the story of your journey to this sacred land, the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, several years ago.
Okay, well, thank you, Judith. And I am Elizabeth, and I'm here in the Tewa world in New Mexico, the land of the Pueblo people. And I guess we could do that. Let's just start with go ahead and maybe close your eyes and just take a few deep breaths. And allow yourself to really sink fully into your body. Feeling the room around you, the space that you now inhabit. And using the breath to come into the core of your being. And exhaling down into the earth to connect with Gaia. And breathing up from Gaia and exhaling down into Gaia. Just take this moment to ground. And the intention of our gathering today is to acknowledge the earth treasure vase that was buried in the Mackenzie King Park on the full moon in June in 2015. And to allow our hearts to connect with the energy emanating from this vase and from all the vases it's connected with around the world in a healing mandala. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you a story. So it's going to be very much in story mode. I came there, well, first in 2014, and then I came back to bury the vase. I brought the vase with me in 2014 and then came back. And I am part of the Earth Treasure Vase Global Healing Project. And this is a project that started in 1990. It began with a beautiful woman named Cynthia Jors, who was living in the Santa Fe area, and she still is. And the man that she was living with at that time had been invited to Nepal to visit an old lama who was 106 years old, who lived in a cave high up in the Himalaya. And she just felt very called to go on this journey with him. And so she got herself to Nepal, and it was a 3-day trek up the mountain. And as they climbed up the narrow paths in the Himalaya, she was just thinking about how significant this moment was, you know, to get to visit a lama who's 106 years old in a cave high in the Himalaya. And so she just began really soul searching what was drawing her here and what was going to be her question that she would ask him. And coming from New Mexico, where we live right below Los Alamos National Labs, where the first atomic bomb was created. And so we opened the atomic age here in New Mexico, and she was very aware it was a time when they wanted to open the WIP, which they did, southern New Mexico, where they're storing a lot of nuclear waste. And so what was heavy on her heart was, how do we provide healing and protection from the earth, especially at this time of being in the nuclear age? And so she got to the mountain, and they camped there for a few weeks. And when it was her opportunity to have audience with the Lama, she asked him, what could be done for the protection and healing of the earth. And first she had to actually tell him about nuclear waste. And so she went through a whole process with him. And there was a group there, and his response was, even one person who practices deeply can change things for the benefit in their area. But he said to her, he kind of pointed and he said, but I want you to take earth treasure vases around the world and put them in these places of need. And so he had his heart son, who was a younger Lama, go around to the various monasteries there in Nepal and collect the medicines. So in those monasteries, they collect very sacred objects. Some of them are actually like tissues from the enlightened masters who have crossed, and so the ancient Tibetan practice was that they would create clay vases in the monastery and fill them with these medicines and pray over them. And then they would be put in the earth and they would do the work of, often they stopped wars, they stopped famines, they brought healing to communities where they were buried. And this ancient practice actually went underground for a time. And then it was, known that it would come back. And so it came back around the 8th century, around the time that humans were really entering into the industrial parts of our development. And so he had 30 of these earth treasure vases made for Cynthia. And her partner received a number that were smaller. I think he received about 80 of them. But anyway, they finished their journey there and came back to Santa Fe and received these vases in the mail. And what they did at that time was to facilitate shipping them. They didn't put the sacred objects inside the vases. They had put it into the clay that the vases were made of.
Wow.
So these vases are imbued with these powerful medicines from the monasteries in Nepal, and they're very powerful. And when you hold them, they feel very alive, very full of consciousness. And yet it was very difficult for Cynthia to think that bearing a little clay vase could actually affect something as huge as the amounts of nuclear waste we were building up on the earth. And she was kind of stunned by the whole assignment, and she put them away for maybe 4 or 5 years, but they really called to her. And so she began to develop a practice which happens on the full moons, because that's a time where prayers are magnified. Mm-hmm. And so she gathered a group in her little Sangha, and every full moon they would pray over the vases and ask for guidance. And so gradually they developed a practice which is based on the ancient Tibetan practice, but is different. So these vases were empty, and so she realized that they could be filled with the prayers and sacred objects of people who were carrying them to different locations around the world. And they also realized a little ways in that it was best to, when they dedicated a vase to a particular place, it's always prepared in the Sangha here. So people will gather on the full moon, we'll dedicate it to the location it's going, we'll fill it with our prayers and our intentions with room for more. And then it will be carried to its place of location where it is usually connected with the indigenous people of that land, for them to add their prayers for their land, their intentions, and to determine where it should be buried. And so every journey is like a journey into the unknown, because you just don't know how it's going to work out. And so the first vases were buried. The very first one she took up to a cave she had found above Los Alamos. And a group of Tibetan monks had come, and she took this whole entourage up the mountain and over the edge. It's over the edge of a deep ravine, and the cave is like partway down the side and then into the mountain. And she did ceremony in there and buried the first vase there. So the very center of this mandala is in Los Alamos. And then she did, like, you know, the headwaters of the Rio Grande, and where the Rio Grande goes into the Gulf of Mexico, because waterways carry prayers and energy in a good way. And the two peaks on either side. So she set up, I wasn't part of it at that time. She set up this core to the mandala, 4 directions, with the center at Los Alamos. And over the years, vases have been going out all over the world. It's become a very dedicated practice of Cynthia's.
And an actual monthly full moon using Zoom.
Yeah, now it is. It has evolved from being always in her Sangha to one that can be, you know, now that she's built up this international community by taking vases all over the world, we have transitioned towards Zoom. And it's beautiful. It was a hard transition, but now people can come in from all over the world, and that's very, very dynamic, very beautiful.
Very powerful. And to be part of that group last night, because we're just coming from a full moon.
Right.
It's powerful to honor the late American visionary, Barbara Marx Hubbard. She talked before she died and created the Birth 2012 project about the fact of technology and science and spirituality coming together, and that technology was the new nervous system of the planet to connect people all over the planet. And in fact, that's how I met many beautiful souls, through technology, and why we're doing these programs, to uplift the oneness. And I really do believe that this journey of experience and events, and the sacredness of being part of that effort that you brought as the steward for the Earth Vase to this heart of Canadian democracy. Tell us a little bit of the story and how you got involved with the Canadian aspect of becoming a steward for this watershed.
Okay, well, I was going to give just a little bit before that. Is that okay?
Sure.
It was so the way I got connected with Alliance for the Earth, which is the other name, or the Earth Treasure Vase Global Healing Project, is that I was working with a spiritual teacher, and she met Cynthia. They were both living in Santa Fe, and Leslie Temple Thurston, my teacher, wanted to have a vase come to South Africa, which is her home country, and bring healing there. And so they did that. They did a trip together to sacred sites in South Africa and connected with Indigenous people there. And then it was 2011, and Leslie Temple Thurston had planned a journey. She did these regularly with groups of going down the Nile, of going and visiting the Great Pyramids and doing prayer trips down the Nile. And so she had one planned for 11/11/11. And she wanted to take a second vase herself to the Giza Plateau, I'm sorry, and put it in on 11/11/11. and that being the top of the Nilotic meridian, and they had buried one vase at the bottom of the Nilotic meridian. So she really was very sensitive to the energies of this mother meridian for the earth coming out of Egypt. And so that was quite an amazing journey. I didn't go on it, but I tracked it. And they got there, and it turns out that people from all kinds of groups from all over the world were converging on the Great Pyramids at 11/11/11. And the Egyptians got very alarmed by some of the stories they heard of what was going to go on. And so they closed the whole plateau. And so there was this group of 21 people gathered there with a vase, and they had just closed the plateau, and they weren't, and no one was supposedly allowed to go in there. And so they went into deep prayer and did ceremony and sealed the vase that they were carrying. And then their trusted friend and guide had finagled this way. He had gotten enough horses and camels for 21 of them to ride in the night out onto the plateau next to the Great Pyramid, incognito, so to speak. And they all got on these camels and horses and rode out there, and actually ended up being out there on the full moon night of 11/11/11, and managed to bury the vase, you know?
Yeah, quite a story.
And it was just such an incredible story. And like every one of the vases has an element of that. And so after that, I had gone out for a full moon to prepare that vase to go to Egypt. And so I kept going to the full moon meditations after that, and was there for the next 3 that went out to Maui, and then to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was a really huge one because of all the conflict and things happening there. And then one that went to Avebury. So they're either buried at places of great need, or they're buried at these power points like Avebury. And so then in 2013, a friend of mine really supported me and actually donated to my going with Cynthia to take the last of her big vases to Australia. And this was really significant because she had been on a 20-year pilgrimage with this, and we were taking the last vase that she was holding. She kept one in the Sangha, but the 29th was going to Australia. And so that's when I got to fully experience in person, you know, both the trials. Every time there's trials. And I think the trials kind of portray what it is that vase is bringing the healing to. You know, those trials manifest on the journey so that we can see them. And we met in Sydney, and the Dalai Lama happened to be there that year. It was 2013. We sat with him. He had the vase up on the back behind where he sat. And yeah, it was really beautiful. And he gave it an honoring. We saw him, you know. And then we went to Uluru and met an incredible elder in Uluru, but he didn't feel like there was a yes to bearing the vase there. And so he gave us teachings and blessings. And then we traveled on to Northern Territory and spent the night in a hotel in Darwin. And a group gathered. We had to go out in trucks from there, you know, because we were going out into country. So we had this caravan of camping trucks and camping gear. And the man who was holding that part of the tour had a dream that night that he needed to put in an extra sleeping bag. So he put an extra sleeping bag in the caravan. We all climbed in, and one of the women who were driving one of the trucks, she had known an elder, Auntie Margaret
Hmm.
Catherine, who she had set up for us to meet in a park part way out to country. So we got to this park late, and Auntie Margaret had been there playing cards with some of the other Indigenous people, and she was in a little shift with barefoot. All she had with her was a little purse, and she was winning, and she'd kind of like gotten into the game and had forgotten, not totally, but sort of, about us when we showed up. And
Elders are allowed to do that.
yeah, and so Cynthia spoke with her, and lo and behold, she really connected. And she said, "I want to come with you." And so barefoot, she just hopped into one of the trucks with us and came on a 3-day journey. And that's what the extra sleeping bag was for. And so she took us, and one of the very beautiful things that happened in Australia was that they have a very strong tradition of welcoming people to country.
Mhm.
So everywhere we had gone, there was an Indigenous elder who welcomed us to that part of Australia. And, and we were taught, like when you introduce yourself to the land knows you.
Uh-huh.
The land knows who you are and what needs to happen for you. And so every place we went, we had these beautiful introductions to country. And Auntie Margaret took us out to the river and got us all lined up on this log that was falling across the waterway. And she had us all putting water on us and giving our DNA into the land and welcoming us to country. And
I just want to say, without interrupting you too much, I know I'm conscious of the time frame.
okay.
What we're talking about here is the significance of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe traditions here in Canada as well. And what you're reminding me to mention, that is a significant part of the heritage and history of why the culture of the First Nations people and the Métis and the Inuit here in Canada is so important to remember, because in this watershed, the significance of the Algonquin people's heritage and culture was to welcome people here, to welcome
Yes.
all the North American Indians to this watershed. And North American Indians came here as nomadic people for thousands of years. So Australia, every time we have the full moon mandala, I'm always reminded the wisdom that comes from all the people involved in this wonderful project, and the energies of the healing coming from the Indigenous people through the hearts of people like ourselves, is emanating all over the planet right now. And so your story about Australia reminds me of getting back to our focus today. Once you can finish that, we can get into the Indigenous and how you were welcomed here, and what was your experience in Canada as well.
Yes, I'm definitely going to get there.
Awesome.
There's just it was an incredible moment where Auntie Margaret, because of the song lines, and this is just, I'm sure this is connected with Canada, because of the song lines and their whole understanding, insight, living in the song lines, she recognized that Cynthia had created a mandala over the earth.
Wow.
The vases that she buried. And so on this 29th one, we had an elder that actually visualized, she could see that new song lines had been awakened by this project.
Yeah, yeah.
And so following that, Cynthia started to receive some of the vases her partner had been given, and he had never done anything with them. And so this is, we call the second generation of Earth Treasure Vase vases. And I asked for one of those first smaller Earth Treasure vases. And so I have a dear friend in Ontario, and there had never been a vase taken to Canada.
That's Kingston, eh?
Yeah. And so I just felt like one really needed to go to Canada. So one of the very first ones was dedicated to Canada, and I held it for about a year. And then, and then I made I came up, let's see, there was one woman in Ottawa, Diana Claire Douglas, who knew Cynthia. And so that was a connect for me. And then she made the connect with the church where Judith was, and Judith made the connect with the indigenous people of that land. And so this is, I call these the golden chains. This is how the golden chain came together was, and then Judith introduced me to Roger Fleury and different members of the community there. And so when I first brought the vase up, we went, they were so kind, you know, and he and Audrey took us out on the island, on Victoria Island, and lit a sacred fire, and we did ceremony around the vase and began the process of the connection between the vase and the indigenous people, the land, and its welcoming there.
Tell us a bit what you built. What was your experience there? And I might mention Audrey is one of the 60 Scoop children that were taken away in our story, in our history of the
Wow.
part of the
Yeah. And she carried a big part of the healing that vase is there to support. Yeah, bless Audrey. She played a very significant part. Well, there were two pieces that really struck me. We visited Chaudière Falls on the way to the island, and I was told the story of how prior to the dam being there, there had been this incredible bowl that Indigenous people traveled far and wide to come to because of the vapors that raised up from it and how it represented to them the peace pipe, the bowl of the peace pipe, right? And I could feel those prayers. There are so many prayers that surround that area. And so the vase connected with that, it very much feels like it carries that. And then going out onto the island and being told the vision of William Commanda, chief grandfather, his vision of a peace community that would be healing for the indigenous people and would also give teachings out to the world that were needed, that need to come from the indigenous people to the world. And we were shown the ruins that are on the island from the factories and stuff, and how, you know, let's see, Douglas Cardinal had designed, you know, the Peace Center. And it was very vivid, very alive for me. And so when we did the sacred fire on the island, I felt that too was very much what the vase was anchoring, had called me to, and was anchoring into, was this vision of the peace.
And actually that vision was for an international Indigenous peace healing center. And the vision was because grandfather was a visionary. He knew that, like many of our indigenous peoples all over the planet know, that we're living through times of prophecy, times of learning to how do we care for and protect the earth as we go through what is natural climate change. And as people often say, COVID-19 will pass, but climate change is real. We are going through change, and we need those indigenous wisdoms and knowledge of the star people that are bringing back their wisdoms. And thank you so much for speaking to Australia, because that's what I would say is the reason the full moon Mandela being on internet and connecting us all is there's so much richness and wisdom and insight that comes from the hearts of people from all over the planet now. And it really inspires us to live and have faith and hope for these times that we're all going through. So your experience is so important, as is mine, to be privileged to be part of this project that is emanating prayers all over the planet. And I love your expression. You could actually feel the prayers are still on Chaudière Island, despite all the construction and all the busyness of the ways of life. Those powerful prayers are still there.
Exactly. Yeah, very palpable. And what I'm realizing as I go further into this journey is that the mandala represents technology. It's a whole nother level of technology. It's one that's actually clean, that's actually pure, and it's something through which we can affect change, just as the indigenous people who gathered around that sacred bowl were building technologies, and so I feel like this vase is very connected to that sacred technology that was built through the ages, and is awakening it, or supporting it, is supporting its awakening again. Yeah, I guess that's one way to say it. So
Supporting us awakening.
yes,
The choice of this technology or that technology.
yes, exactly. So yes, so I did that ceremony. I left. I didn't know where the vase would be buried.
Yeah, we went through quite a process in that process. You came back the second time when you knew it was time. Tell us a little bit about why you knew it was time to come back the second time.
Well, let's see, there were a couple things that happened. One thing that happened also while I was up there was I met a Mohawk woman that Cynthia had met in Findhorn, actually, Kohantane. And her father had always told the story of the Peace Pilgrim. And he had had visions of reconciliation, condolence ceremonies to heal the indigenous people. And so one of the things I did with the vase was I went and I met Quantane, and she asked my friend and I to enter into a relationship with her to help end the disappearance of Indigenous women. And now that was the first time I had heard of the disappearance of Indigenous women, and I didn't know how extreme it was.
Missing women and children.
Yeah. And so that was a great awakening for me. And then I came back and I ended up watching a documentary made on the survivors of the residential schools in Canada. And it rocked my world. Oh my God, it threw me into trauma. But it is an issue that's very much on my heart. And it's, one that's played out in the US and it played out in Australia. So all these places where the missionaries did their good work. And so anyway, all this was on my heart, and I was in communication with Judith, and she said, well, there's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that's going to be coming back to Ottawa at the end of May. And I said, no, I didn't know. But as soon as she said that, I knew that was the time the vase needed to come to Canada. And so she also told me about the 3-day event Kairos Canada was giving in support of the Truth and Reconciliation report. So I came there to Ottawa for those, I don't know, 5 days or something, and partook in those things. It was very powerful. And Judith said, you have to do the blanket exercise, which of course was extremely powerful. We did one on the steps of Parliament with a few hundred people and blankets spread out on one of those big landings partway up the steps. And everybody who left the blankets went up on the steps above where the drummers were and speakers and musicians. It was really dramatic. It felt like they were going to another realm, and boy, all of it was so moving. And ahead of that, Judith had organized a small group, and just enough of us that fit in her van, and we had been touring all around looking for where would we bury this vase, and we hadn't really found the location. And we really wanted to bury it on the full moon, which was the 2nd of June. And we were less than a week away. And finally, Judith made a connect with grandmother, what was her name?
Annie St. George Smith.
Yes, St. George Smith. And I never met her, but she was precious and important. I talked to her on the phone and she listened about the vase and she said, I think it needs to be buried at Mackenzie King Park. That's where lots of people could visit it. And I was like, well, it's not meant to be visited. It's meant to be buried where nobody will ever disturb it. It can just do its work. But she was very strong about that. So we called the Mackenzie King Park.
Actually, I want to thank Elder Douglas Cardinal for that. It was through Black Hawk Elder Douglas Cardinal.
Oh, he called.
And in fact, he's the only Aboriginal architect that's worldwide famous. He actually is the builder of the Museum of History. So Douglas knew exactly who I needed to call to speak to the National Capital Commission to get permission to have the vase taken to Mackenzie King Estates in Gatineau Park. So it's through Douglas having the right people for me to call that we.
Well, that's amazing because he really wanted the vase to be buried on the island, but you know, there was too much strife around the Truth and Reconciliation, and there was no way we could do that. You know, it was just, there was too much going on and the island was being watched, and it was just like, so that's beautiful that he helped with that step. And so Judith called and they say, well, it takes at least 2 weeks to get through the bureaucracy and get permission. And we are like, oh no, we have less than a week. And there was a weekend in there when offices were closed. And she told them we wanted a place where it could be buried and not be disturbed. And you know what? They called back the next day and they said they had clearance. And not only that, they invited our little group to come there and they would show us the places they thought we could bury the vase that would never be disturbed. And it was amazing. We went there and they gave us a beautiful tour around. So we heard the story of Mackenzie King and places he met with people and places he loved dearly. And we picked the spot. Roger Fleury helped us pick the spot. And so it was all set up.
And grandmother, the Algonquin grandmother, Nancy Mayette, and Roger. And I believe there were so many others that I guess we can list later that were there. But
yes, there were 12 of us that gathered the next Tuesday, and Annie St. George couldn't come, so she had asked Nancy Mayette to be our custodian elder of ceremony. And we arrived on a rainy morning and they had a park person out there. She was in her raincoat waiting for us with parking passes so we could come in and get started before the public was coming in, and there to see if we needed anything. They were just so kind and
accommodating and gracious.
Oh my God, just totally facilitated the way, just opened the way. It was amazing. So we went into our little spot and it was beautiful. There was a young man who came with his mother and he carried grandmother Nancy's chair in and set her up in our little spot. And as soon as she sat down, her heart just ballooned. She just opened, she goes, I am so grateful for this opportunity to be in nature, because she has a bit of a handicap and it's not easy. And so as soon as that heart opening happened, everything just went, you know, and we started ceremony. It was so beautiful. And Roger and the young man took turns digging because it's right there on the Canadian shelf and it's hard rock.
Hard-headed like some Canadians.
Yeah. But we got down and we did our ceremony with our last prayers and offerings and buried it. It was just beautiful. And so there it is, anchoring those energies of the truth and reconciliation, of the indigenous prayers of the bowl into the river, of the vision for the peace center. And it's part of this bigger mandala of, you know, about 100 vases around the world that Auntie Margaret had just ignited its reality as an energetic form.
Uh-huh.
And Cynthia, she had also invited Cynthia to come back to Australia. And she really wanted a vase taken to this special place. They had to fly helicopters, but she was custodial elder of this land. And there are these table rocks where you can camp underneath, and for I don't know, millennia, I don't know how old, really ancient. The whole top of those table rocks inside the cave structures are covered with pictographs. Wow. From ancestors from way back. And she really wanted a second vase brought there. Oh, and yeah. So Cynthia flew there when I flew to Canada, and we buried, she buried a vase at Gambermong at the same time I buried the one in Gatineau. And so this was an incredible moment of the first of the second generation vases being buried at these two powerful places.
Yeah.
So there is a direct connection with Australia.
Yeah.
And yeah, did you want to say something, Judith?
Well, it's just the connection we have with former colonies as well. When you look at the history and heritage of Canada, and being a member of the British Commonwealth, what we're beginning to see, history is so important as is heritage. And what I'm beginning to see with the Truth and Reconciliation process and why it was so needful, it's very similar to what Elijah Harper was talking about in 1995, where he heard the call of spirit that he must call a sacred assembly in Hull, Quebec. Because until the voices of his people could begin to express their story and their pain, Canada as a nation could never heal. Right. And so when you look at the connection of all the colonial empire that has been part of our history, it's our story. Mm-hmm. We cannot forget the story because it's our ancestors' past. It's their pain and their trauma. And to this day, we carry still significant issues around continuing the old story, the old record. And now we're at a time of humanity's journey of awakening through those Tibetan prayer vases. They awaken the earth, but they also awaken the hearts of humanity to the goodness in all of us. And it's the goodness that connects us that's greater than the pain. So that pain, when I look at this gratitude of the times we're living, despite all the pain, we're beginning to ignite the hearts of compassion.
Right.
So when we look at this thing called New Zealand and Australia, we can't but remember that in the heart of Canadian democracy, there's still a lot of pain and trauma because we're going through this shift, this change from the old to the new. And it's kind of like you were talking about. We already have the technology of the ancient ancestors that's coming back to remind us we can do it a different way. Yeah. We don't need to do it an industrial, materialistic way, a colonialized Asian way, a genocide way. We can awaken to the new way. And the new ways are emanating now through the hearts of humanity. And if it weren't for Kitchissippi United Church, we couldn't have had all those beautiful souls that also made this vase possible in Gatineau Park, because it was their prayers and their offerings and their gratitude in those vases, and the ceremony that you created there was also a significant beginning point.
Yes.
And it led to 12 core group of people doing that journey of exploring. And with the thanks to the grandmothers and to Elder Roger Fleury and Audrey, despite their pain, they were there helping to guide us to find the right spot where these treasure vases could emanate that healing energy throughout this watershed. Mm-hmm. So I think good time for me to mention that Diane Claire Douglas was an important connector in all of this as well. And you mentioned Sherry, I think Sherry's last name is Croft, is that correct?
No, Sherry Peters.
Sherry Peters in Kingston. Now, what a blessing to have her part of that journey for a while as well. And when we look at Kitchissippi United Church, they were very much similar over my years as doing a lot of projects. Without Kitchissippi United Church, a lot of the projects I've done around healing circles would not be taking place, but they were a significant part of the truth and reconciliation process, as were all the churches and all the different diverse religions in Canada, who the church thought they were doing well, but we see now that we weren't doing a really good job of caring for the education of spirituality being not oppressed, but making sure we remember that spirituality and education is very important, especially in the 21st century. So we cannot but learn by that truth and reconciliation process. And we're still in that process right now.
Yes, we are.
Having that young mother and her son, again, significant to have a young person to be part of that group and to have the mother. And also part of that group, if I remember correctly, we also had Métis grandmother Christine Vincent, who was an integral part of that journey. We also had a friend of mine who was a university professor who came from a Tibetan Christian background from Hong Kong originally. Tanny Liu was a significant part of that ceremony. Dr. Peter Stockdale is always